Tonight on Primetime, diplomatic momentum between Russia and Ukraine is back under the spotlight. A second round of talks in Abu Dhabi concluded without agreement, but the meetings drew attention from Washington, Brussels and regional partners amid shifting military realities and parallel negotiations elsewhere. Hopes for a ceasefire endure, but what comes next? Talks stall while diplomacy shifts gears. Good evening. Efforts between Moscow and Kyiv are back in focus after a second Abu Dhabi meeting closed without progress. Now, the Kremlin has ruled out further engagements with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas. Ukrainian officials say a major security agreement with Washington is complete and now awaiting a formal signature.
International talks to end the conflict are once again at a standstill. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said Moscow will not engage in talks with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas. Russia will simply wait for her to leave office. The remarks came after the talks in Abu Dhabi ended without a deal.
How can you discuss anything with Kaja Kallas? We will never discuss anything with her, nor will the Americans discuss anything with her. And that is obvious. What can we do? We just have to wait until she leaves, or given everything that is going on, EU's leadership, name anyone.
The Kremlin spokesman also said Russia is closely watching US plans for the Golden Dome missile defense system. He emphasized the strategic importance of Greenland.
Of course, it's a strategic location in terms of security. I don't want to speak on who can threaten Greenland, but it has a lot of importance regarding strategic stability and security.
And on the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said at a press conference in Vilnius that the US security guarantees for Ukraine are fully ready. Kyiv is now waiting for the date and location for the document to be signed. Zelensky said the document will go through ratification in both the US Congress and the Ukrainian Parliament, and he stressed that European security guarantees are also crucial.
Technically, Ukraine will be ready in the first half of 2026 to open all clusters to negotiate EU membership. Will be fully technically ready for EU membership in 2027 in our view, and we want a specific date in our agreement on ending the war with Russia, so that all sides then adhere to these agreements, including the aggressor, who would sign a 20-point plan if such a moment comes, so that no one can block us again afterwards.
The president also said he is demanding a specific date for the end of the war, that the aggressor must sign a 20-point plan, and that pressure through sanctions should continue.
I hope America will not reduce pressure on Russia over this war for the sake of diplomacy. Europe must be resolute as well. To continue pressure, sanctions pressure on Russia, Russian tankers transporting oil, including through the Baltic Sea, must be stopped.
It is worth noting that on January 23rd and 24th, Ukraine and Russia held their first trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi. The meeting, attended by US mediators, discussed Washington's framework for ending the war, but no agreement was reached.
Well, joining us now is Alexei Goncharenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament, to talk us through where diplomacy stands, what Kyiv expects next, and how Ukraine is reading the international mood. Mr. Goncharenko, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. No deal then in Abu Dhabi, but from your point of view, was there progress to be seen? Did anything concrete stand out that emerged from those meetings?
For the moment, we don't have any exact results, but the fact that the meeting happened, it's already kind of a result, because for the first time from the spring 2022, Ukrainian and Russian delegations spoke at one table together with Americans. So we want peace here in Ukraine as soon as possible. That's why I welcome any negotiations. Definitely the problem is that during these negotiations, Russia continued its barbaric attacks against power grid in Ukraine, against civilian infrastructure. Now millions of Ukrainians are without electricity, heating, many without running water. All of these in a very tough and rough winter, up to minus 20 Celsius degrees weather. Definitely, it's not a good background for any negotiations.
No, of course. Moscow, of course, has shut the door very firmly on any further talks with the EU's foreign policy chief, saying we will never discuss anything with her. Very strong language. Does that weaken Europe's role, do you think, or was it already severely limited in that respect?
I don't think that it shows weakness of Russia when they are afraid of one lady, Estonian lady, former Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. So why they are so afraid of her? In general, Russia doesn't want peace. They just try to win time. They are afraid of the United States. They are not afraid of Europe, unfortunately, and I think Europe here should make lessons. But they are afraid of the United States, and that's why they want to show some willingness towards peace under the negotiations with the Americans.
And just turning further to the United States, I mean, Kyiv has says that there are major security agreements with the US is ready to be signed. In simple terms, what would this mean for Ukraine?
I haven't seen this exact document, but in general, this is the keystone of all the construction, because Russia started this war not 4 years ago, but 12 years ago. 4 years ago, they started full-scale invasion, and I will remind you that even days before full-scale invasion, they were continuing, including Putin, to tell we're not going to attack, it's just military trainings. So they're lying all the time. They're not going to stop themselves. So we need to have a strong security guarantees if we want to prevent continuation of the war in future.
I mean, there are so many variables at play here, aren't there? So many diplomatic calculations to be made simultaneously. If negotiations are stuck, how does Ukraine decide when to keep talking and when to focus more on security and defense instead?
No, it's not like this. We are doing our best on the battlefield today because every day Russia is attacking. And the only reason that Russia is at the table, that they failed to take Kiev or Odessa or Kharkiv or any other major city of Ukraine. They failed to achieve their goal to wipe off Ukraine from the map of the world. And that's why they now at the table. So we clearly understand this. So it's not that if we're speaking, we are not preparing our defense. We are doing it constantly, and we will continue to do this when we have a neighbor, such country as the Russian Empire.
And so many Ukrainians will be watching this, not just in Ukraine, but elsewhere throughout the world. What do you think would be a realistic next step towards ending this war? As you rightly said, so many people now are suffering during this winter. Is there any hope or insight, do you think?
There is always hope. We human beings, we all hope, and that is something essential. But we are not just dreamers. We clearly understand what language Russia understands, and this is the language of strength, language of force. And if this language will be used enough, If United States will put enough pressure on Russia, then we will have result. If not, there will be no result and the war will continue.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening on Primetime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, joining us now is Andriy Teleshenko, a former Ukrainian diplomat and advisor to the Prosecutor General, bringing a diplomatic and legal perspective on where this conflict may be heading and what space, if any, still exists for a negotiated outcome. Mr. Teleshenko, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Complicated situation, of course, as we just discussed there with our previous guest. From a diplomatic standpoint, when talks repeatedly fail, does that signal bad timing, hopelessness, or bad structure? What's your perspective?
It signals the unwillingness of one side right now, especially Kyiv, does not want to end this war. This war started, as it was mentioned, long before 2022. It started when the Ukrainian government, Kyiv regime, started to bombard the people of Donbass in 2014. And now is the continuation of this. Ukraine could have ended this, having no conflict with the Minsk Accords, having Donbass as an autonomy. And that's the main reason we're having this conflict, because it was all lies, and basically the West wanted this war. The West wanted to dismantle Russia from within, having two Slavic nations fight and having a coup in Russia. That's what the end game for the West was, and it didn't come to this outcome, and that's why this war is still continuing. There are negotiations on the table, and that is a good step forward with the new administration in Washington that wants to have peace. And that's the first step, and we're going to see what's going to be the outcome of all these negotiations, because it's not just about Ukraine. It's about the whole geopolitical landscape that is changing rapidly right now. And the bipolar world right now is becoming multipolar world, which is going to be the new essential for the development in the next 100 years. And that's just the fundamentals that are being laid out right now. Ukraine is a puzzle in this huge picture.
And in terms of solving that puzzle, I mean, I think many people watching this crisis, this war play out, will just get a sense of almost fatalism of this stalemate just enduring indefinitely. There's been a focus on military pressure, a focus on security guarantees, but do you think there could be diplomatic incentives, diplomatic pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, that might still be missing?
Diplomatic pieces are Ukraine being a sovereign, independent country without joining any NATO or any blocs, guaranteeing its own security guarantees by being a neutral state between Russia and Europe. That would be a game changer in this situation, and I think a lot of people who are involved in this conflict, which is between the West and Russia, and Ukraine is in between, would be put into an end in this conflict. That's what people are looking for. But unfortunately, Ukraine not being sovereign today, being pushed by puppeteers from Europe within the deep state and also Washington to continue this war, to make money for their owners in the West, in Washington and Brussels. That's why we're having no diplomatic outcome in this situation. That's why this war even happened, because people wanted to change the regime in Russia. People wanted to change the government in the Russian Federation, and it didn't happen. Russia stood strong for the 20,000 sanctions that were implemented on it, and it's on the table talking right now, trying to guarantee something out of it, because nobody wants to take over the whole Ukraine. It's too expensive. It's going to be too costly for man-wise. And right now, the situation is to sit down and have common sense from one side in Kyiv to agree upon, saying, we will start this conflict, we will end this conflict by guaranteeing the rights of the Russian-speaking population, the religious rights of the Orthodox Christians in Ukraine, the guaranteeing that Ukraine is going to be a sovereign, independent state without joining any NATO or any foreign military forces that are going to threaten the Russian Federation, a nuclear state. Because if something would happen like this within the borders of the United States, I think the United States would act immediately. That's what we saw in Venezuela. That's what we're going to see in Cuba next, and then other Latin American states that are going to be so-called threatening the United States. Right now, this is the reality. The strongest countries dictate the situation on the ground. That's what always has been like this, and it's coming back to the table again.
And the language toward Kaja Kallas was very strong indeed. Is that because Russia sees her as incompetent or unserious, or is it something more like she's disingenuous, an agitator in some way? What is the evaluation of her and of the EU from Russia's perspective at this point?
Kaja Kallas, not just Russia doesn't want to talk to her. The United States, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is ignoring to meet with her because she is not worth to talk to. She doesn't represent the people of Europe. Europe is being divided right now. We're seeing countries, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, even Poland, are having their own point of view on the situation, on the geopolitical view within Europe and how it should approach the war in Ukraine. And even Italy is coming out and making strong statements about peace and ending this conflict. But no, Kallas, Ursula von der Leyen, and others that are not also sovereign, but are coordinated by the deep state, the bankers, the multi-industrial complex of Europe and the United States are pushing this war. So there's nothing to talk to her about. Nobody's afraid of Kallas. Nobody's afraid of Europe because they basically turned themselves from a sovereign, independent union to allies of the United States by signing right now recently the agreements for $850 billion worth of gas that they cannot pay for. The Nord Stream pipelines were blown up. They kept quiet about it. Nobody's talking about what really happened. So they gave away their sovereignty. So why should somebody talk to, like Russia, to a non-sovereign state? And the same thing in the United States. They don't want to talk to Kaja Kallas or the European Union because you can give orders and they will obey because they have no other way out. The economy in the European Union is degrading. German economy is zero, no production. French economy, no production, is zero growth. So why should we talk to them? They're going to come to us anyway. That's how Russia thinks in this situation. Okay. And I think that's what everybody has to understand. Europe has also lost its sovereignty after Ukraine engaging in this war, and it's losing. The people of Europe are losing. The people of Ukraine are losing this war, and it has to end.
And so much talk about allies and blocs and partnerships. How much room, how much freedom do you think Ukraine realistically has itself to shape its diplomatic track?
Ukraine's diplomatic corps has basically lost its strength after the coup in 2014. I saw it on my own eyes, how the West, how foreign ambassadors, the G7 ambassadors, were giving orders to the diplomatic corps and what to do, how to hire people, how to fire people, who to implement, and what messages to deliver. I myself was involved in a couple of those negotiations and talks with the White House, where we were advisors of President Obama, were giving us orders how to deliver the message to the president of Ukraine, what the president of Ukraine has to do, or if he doesn't do it, is going to be destroyed politically, or no money is going to be given. So there's no sovereignty at all within the diplomatic corps of Ukraine today. Unfortunately, the people who are running the show in Ukraine, they're running the show for somebody else. And you have to change that. You have to have people who are ready to come into Ukraine from outside, who fled because of this regime in Kiev, and basically start a new projection of negotiations with the Russian Federation on a peace talks, a real peace talk deal, not just somebody pushing it from the outside or somebody trying to save his face or his money bag. And that's the reality. And unfortunately, that's not the situation right now on the ground in Kiev. You have to change it by having independent, sovereign actors, diplomats, professionals come back into the picture and start talking to one another, to the Russian Federation, to the United States, and to Europe. Then things will change. And of course, the United States is using Ukraine right now to negotiate their own goals around the globe. Europe is doing it the same way. Ukraine have to get their act together, change the government, have a transitional team come to power that will sign a peace negotiations deal and have a political will to do that, and then implement elections by the rules that everybody's going to take part in. That's the steps that have to be taken. Unfortunately, the diplomatic corps in Ukraine and the government are not even talking or not even thinking about those kind of steps because, first of all, they're trying to push this agenda of so-called peace negotiations for the United States midterms to come to pass. So they'll make Trump look like a fool, and then they'll have the Democrats come to power, and they think they're going to be back on their horse again. That's what their game is, and that's what they're playing this game for, I said, the actors outside of the country. Ukraine is not sovereign and not being able to make its decisions on the ground, even within this negotiation process.
And in terms of how that talking is actually done, I mean, so much diplomacy recently has been played out in plain sight, hasn't it? Very public meetings, very public proclamations on all sides. I mean, presumably these quiet channels, back channels, presumably they still exist. There is still conversation going on that the public isn't aware of.
Of course, there's always back channels going on within these discussions, especially between Russia and the United States. And Russia's been talking about this, and the United States has been talking about this. Diplomacy is always done behind closed doors, real diplomacy. Whatever we're seeing in the picture, it's only a small little piece of what is really happening on the ground. Because as I said, these negotiations on Ukraine are not just about Ukraine anymore. They're negotiations about the change of government, the change of the regime in Kiev. That's what they're talking about. Who are the new people who are going to come in, the new actors, who are going to be the next president of Ukraine. Those are negotiations that are happening behind the closed doors, behind the back channels. And if those back channels will never be there, I think we'll be in World War III today. So thank God for real diplomacy, that there's still cool minds prevailing, and they're actually acting on it and not willing to push the world into a chaos and total destruction. And we have to thank that for the new, as I said, administration in Washington, and that Moscow, that actually wanted peace for the last 15 years, talking about Ukraine and saying, let's have a peace deal, let's negotiate the Minsk Accords, the Istanbul Accords that they're willing to talk about in Moscow. Last year, Putin talked about, again, meeting and negotiating on the Istanbul Accord Acts, and said, it's going to get worse, let's sit down and talk. If somebody would want to destroy Ukraine or totally wipe it out, I think we would see the picture like we saw in Gaza, total chaos, total destruction, and millions of people just fleeing the country. Now this is being put to an end. And right now, I think this is the heating point of the negotiations that are happening right now. And a lot of pressure is being put from both sides to make peace really happen. And there's a diplomacy behind the closed doors is the one that we have to focus on, that we're not seeing in the press being talked about.
Andrei, you mentioned at the start of the conversation a strong desire on the part of Russia for Ukraine to show demonstrable neutrality when it comes to Europe. I'd just be keen to get your evaluation of where we are now in terms of Russia's red lines. What foundations does Moscow think need to be laid down now, politically, legally, internationally, to get this peace that the world so badly wants?
I think there's the public picture that everybody talked about, the peace deal, but also there's the things that Russia talked about publicly but are not on paper what we're seeing right now. But it's the regime change in Kiev, the denazification of the Kiev regime as a whole today, because we're seeing the destruction of monuments, the history of Ukraine that it had for hundreds of years. Ukraine was part of Russia. Ukrainian territories were part of Russia for more than 350 years. That's history. And Russia's saying we have to focus on having that as an aspect. No pressure or no going after any Russian-speaking population. No going after and pressuring and destroying the Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine, because we're seeing the closing of the churches, mass imprisonment of clergymen and priests in Ukraine. So those steps have to be taken forward, and there's the neutrality of Ukraine. And I think the next step is what Russia is focusing on, people are not talking about in the press, is the federalization of what's going to be left of Ukraine Yeah, I know that those points are being discussed right now on the table, not just in Abu Dhabi, but between Washington and Moscow. That what's going to be left of the parts of Ukraine that are going to be independent or sovereign or free from Russia, they're going to be federalized, and each region would have its own basically government, so they could move on peacefully in each part of Ukraine, depending on the cultural aspect of that region. So that's the next step that we're going to see, and maybe it's going to go public soon.
Mr. Seleshenko, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Katie Wilson. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time now. Katie Wilson is with us with the very latest business news stories of the day. Katie, what's on the agenda tonight?
Yeah, there's been a lot going on. There's tensions over electricity sales in South America and relief for TikTok fans in the US. So, as I say, there's a lot to go at, so let's get started. First up, Colombia says it's cutting off electricity sales and slapping new tariffs on its neighbour Ecuador after it announced a 30% security charge. What started as trade tensions is now tangled up with border control, drug trafficking, and a very public war of words.
Colombia is suspending electricity sales to Ecuador and will impose a 30% tariff on 20 products from its neighbor. The move comes a day after Ecuador's president, Daniel Noboa, said his government would impose a 30%, quote, security charge on goods from Colombia starting February 1st. Noboa cited a trade deficit and a lack of cooperation on fighting drug trafficking. In its announcement, Colombia did not say what products were covered by the new tariffs. Its top imports from Ecuador are fish, vegetable oil, and auto parts. In response, Ecuador's energy minister said Colombian crude being transported on the OCP pipeline, Ecuador's second largest, would face, quote, reciprocity, though she didn't spell out what that would mean. Colombian President Gustavo Petro addressed the issue on Thursday.
We sold them energy when they needed it, and now they don't need it. Well, they are seeing that the one who shouts the most is the one who makes the most friends. But I don't like to shout sometimes.
He also demanded a close watch on the border.
Necesitamos control absoluto en la frontera con Ecuador.
We need absolute control at the border with Ecuador, by land and by sea, to impede fentanyl supplies from entering Colombia, which don't come by boat. It's impossible. They come on merchant ships.
Imposible. Vienen en contenedores de buques mercantes.
Colombia has repeatedly rejected accusations it is not doing enough to tackle drug smuggling. U.S. President Donald Trump has also accused Petro of failing to stop the flow of cocaine to the United States, which he has denied. The Colombian president was sanctioned by the U.S. last year. The tensions eased in January, following a cordial phone call between Petro and Trump.
Well, after Colombia and Ecuador's tariff tension, global markets are feeling the jitters and gold is cashing in. Prices shot past $5,000 an ounce on Monday, extending a historic rally as investors flock to the safe haven metal amid geopolitical uncertainty.
Gold surged past $5,000 an ounce on Monday for the first time. Spot prices jumped around 2% in early Asian trade and are already up some 17% this year alone. The precious metal soared 64% in 2025, driven by a demand for its perceived safe haven status amid global uncertainty. Other factors include U.S. monetary easing, heavy central bank buying, and record inflows into gold-backed investment funds. Analysts say the latest catalyst is a deepening crisis of confidence in U.S. assets, sparked by a series of erratic policy moves from the Trump administration, including tariff threats against allies. A weaker dollar has also added momentum, as it makes gold, which is priced in the U.S. currency, more affordable for buyers in other countries. One analyst at Metal Focus told Reuters he expects prices to keep rising, forecasting peaks of around $5,500 later this year. Other metals, including platinum, have also surged to record highs, with silver breaking above the $100 mark for the first time on Friday.
Over to India now, who may be about to give foreign car makers a much smoother ride. Sources say New Delhi plans to slash steep tariffs on EU car imports as India and Brussels close in on a long-awaited free trade deal that could be sealed as early as Tuesday.
India plans to slash tariffs on cars imported from the European Union to 40% from as high as 110%. That was according to sources on Monday. It would be the biggest opening yet of the country's vast market as the two sides close in on a free trade pact that could come as early as Tuesday. Two sources told Reuters that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has agreed to immediately reduce the tax on a limited number of cars from the bloc, with an import price of more than $17,739. They added this will be further lowered to 10% over time, and would ease access to the Indian market for European automakers such as VW, Mercedes-Benz and BMW. India's Commerce Ministry and the European Commission declined to comment. India and the EU are expected to announce on Tuesday the conclusion of drawn-out negotiations for the Free Trade Pact. It's already being dubbed the mother of all deals and could expand bilateral trade and lift Indian exports of goods such as textiles and jewellery. They've been hit by 50% US tariffs since late August. India is the world's third largest car market by sales after the US and China, but its domestic auto industry has been one of the most protected. New Delhi currently levies tariffs of 70% and 110% on imported cars. Lower taxes will allow car makers to sell imported vehicles for a cheaper price and, according to one of the sources, test the Indian market with a broader portfolio before committing to manufacturing more cars locally.
Amazon is gearing up for another wave of redundancies as part of its push to trim roughly 30,000 jobs. The cuts are said to hit units from retail to web services, marking the largest corporate staff reduction in Amazon's 30-year history.
Amazon is planning a second round of job cuts next week, part of its broader goal of laying off roughly 30,000 corporate workers. That's according to two people familiar with the matter who told Reuters exclusively that the layoffs could begin as soon as Tuesday. Amazon in October cut some 14,000 white-collar jobs, about half of the 30,000 target first reported by Reuters. The total this time is expected to be about the same as last year. The sources told Reuters that jobs in the company's retail division, Prime Video unit, Amazon Web Services, and Human Resources Department, known as People Experience and Technology, are slated to be affected. The sources cautioned that details of Amazon's plans could change. An Amazon spokesperson declined to comment. Amazon tied the October round of job cuts to the rise of AI software. However, CEO Andy Jassy later told analysts during the company's third-quarter earnings call that the job reductions were, quote, not really financially driven and not even really AI-driven. Instead, he said, the move was prompted by culture, meaning the company has too much bureaucracy. The full reduction of 30,000 jobs would represent a small portion of Amazon's nearly 1.6 million employees. But they would slash almost 10% of the company's corporate workforce and mark the largest staff reduction in Amazon's 3-decade history.
Well, from simmering tensions between the US and Europe to the Fed's first big meeting of the year, it's shaping up to be a packed week for markets. Investors will watch everything from Greenland to tech giants to see what could make or break investor confidence.
From teetering U.S. and European relations to a tense first Fed meeting of the year, these are the stories to watch in business and finance in the coming week. As tensions ease between U.S. President Donald Trump and Europe over Greenland, markets will be hoping for continued de-escalation, with the notable exception of gold investors and weapons firms. Markets are eager to see more details about a framework deal the U.S. and NATO struck, and for Trump's Greenland threats to stay safely out of his social media feed. It could help bring world stock markets back to record highs and put the brakes on gold's seemingly unstoppable run. The Federal Reserve is widely expected to hold steady at its latest interest rate setting meeting Wednesday. This will be the first time Chair Jerome Powell holds a Fed press conference since this month's revelations that the Trump administration launched an investigation into his multi-billion-dollar refurbishment of the central bank's headquarters. Powell has slammed the move as a pretext to try to gain more influence over interest rates. It also adds to the other two key subplots in the Fed feud: the Supreme Court's case over Trump's bid to fire Governor Lisa Cook and his still-to-be-announced decision on who takes over from Powell in May. 4 of the Magnificent 7 U.S. tech giants report earnings, with Microsoft, Apple, Meta, and Tesla scheduled to post results. The key for many will be to what extent their massive AI spending is paying off, some of which is funded increasingly by debt. And it's no longer enough to just beat forecasts. The Mag 7 may find shareholders want even more magnificence in order to feel comfortable about the stock's stratospheric valuations.
And finally, relief for TikTok fans in the US. ByteDance has struck a deal to create a majority American-owned joint venture, sidestepping a potential ban. The move gives US investors control of the algorithm, whilst ByteDance keeps a minority stake.
TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance says it has finalized a move to avoid a ban in the U.S. The deal will create a new majority American-owned joint venture aimed at protecting U.S. user data. It's a major step after years of scrutiny by President Donald Trump, who in 2020 unsuccessfully tried to ban the app over national security concerns. In a post on Thursday, Trump said he is, quote, so happy to have helped in saving TikTok. He also lauded the deal, thanking Chinese President Xi Jinping for, quote, working with us and ultimately approving the deal. The TikTok USDS joint venture will be responsible for securing U.S. data and apps and TikTok's recommendation algorithm. Under the agreement, American and global investors will own 80.1% of the venture, while ByteDance keeps the rest. Tech giant Oracle, private equity group Silver Lake, and Abu Dhabi-based MGX will serve as managing investors, each holding 15%. A White House official says both the U.S. and Chinese governments have approved the deal. The venture will retain and secure TikTok's algorithm using only U.S. data, which will be secured on Oracle's cloud system. Reuters sources said last year that ByteDance would still own TikTok's U.S. operations, but that control of data, content, and algorithms would shift to the new venture.
That's your business news roundup for the day. Back to you, Guy. TikTok isn't going anywhere, it seems.
No, thankfully. Big relief for users, but also for the markets as well, I think. Katie, thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at how trucker blockades across the Western Balkans are disrupting EU supply routes and why border rules have pushed hauliers to protest. Stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. Select challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. Now, a major supply chain disruption is underway in the southeast of Europe. Hauliers from several Western Balkans countries are blocking freight border crossings with the EU, protesting new and old rules. Well, truckers from Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro and North Macedonia started the blockade on Monday at noon local time, demanding a change to the EU rules that limit their stay in the Schengen area for a maximum of 90 days within a 6-month period, paired with a stricter control when the new entry-exit system fully comes into force. In April, drivers' associations warn of a collapse in the sector. Well, joining me now in the studio to unpack this is Andy Mioch, our very own reporter presenter extraordinaire, Mr. Mioch, very good to see you. Set the scene for us then, please, Andy. Why are these blockades happening, and how widespread is the disruption so far?
Well, when we look at the footage from the ground, it seems that those earlier announcements by all these individual national drivers associations that this is going to be a proper regional blockade, it seems those announcements were true. All land freight border crossings between these countries and the surrounding EU countries, that is Croatia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria and Greece, are blocked. Also what's blocked is the Montenegrin Adriatic Sea port of Bar. So when you look at a map of Europe, the Western Balkans, which is surrounded by the European Union, is currently closed for imports, exports or transits of good, with some exceptions. The protesters and the organizers of the blockade said that they will allow through trucks carrying medicines, livestock or explosives and ammunition. The blockade also does not cover personal or passenger traffic in personal vehicles, buses and so on. The protests are expected to last a week, or as the organizers put it, they could hold them if a solution is found.
Andy, why exactly are the drivers so angry? And the EU border rules have been often debated, but why are they suddenly becoming such a flashpoint?
Well, the blockade itself was granted as the 90 out of 180 protests. That refers to an EU rule that says that non-EU passport holders that have a visa-free regime with the bloc can remain in the Schengen area for 90 days within 6 months. The drivers are asking to be exempt from that rule, saying we are not tourists, we are not migrants, we're professional drivers. The main issue for them, as they put it, is that a truck driver that mainly does routes to and from the European Union uses up that 90-day limit pretty quickly, and if he overstays, he risks getting caught, getting deported. These associations spoke of dozens of drivers who got arrested, deported, and handed multi-month or even multi-year bans on entering the European Union just last year. We've heard different things from different national associations, but there is this overarching theme. The Association of Transporters of Serbia, for example, is saying that their first request is that negotiations on the issue actually begin with the European Commission.
And of course, the 90-day rule, I mean, it's been around for years, hasn't it? What is it about the climate, the situation now, that's pushing the hauliers to take this action?
Well, guys, this has been a problem for a while now, and there's been protests organized earlier, for example, back in September in Bosnia and Herzegovina. But this new EU electric entry and exit system that launched in October acted as a trigger of sorts. That system functions automatically by biometric data, as opposed to the previous stamp-based model. Is supposed to be fully implemented in April. What that basically means is that this 90 out of 180 rule will be enforced more strictly. What we've been hearing from the ground from all of these border crossings is that the entry-exit system is not the issue, but their problem is the limitation itself, and what they are demanding is, how they put it, to be allowed to work.
And this impact on supply chains, I mean, in a sense, it's obvious. If there's no trucks getting through, there is obviously going to be an impact on supply chains. I mean, in terms of the specifics of that, what types of goods are we starting to see being delayed or at risk?
You can imagine that a wide range of things is loaded up on those trucks. Before the blockade, the organizers announced that roughly 17 million people, which is a rough estimate of the population of the Western Balkans countries, will face severe supply chain disruptions. When it comes to data, when we look at Eurostat, the latest numbers that we have are for 2024. They show that total trade in goods between the EU and the Western Balkans reached 83.5 billion euros. That year, according to that same provider of data, EU's main imports from the Western Balkans were machinery and appliances, base metals and mineral products, and according to the same data, the main exports mirror them. So basically, the same category of goods are being imported and exported. As the Secretary General of one of these participating associations from North Macedonia put it, they are aware there will be certain financial losses for everyone with this blockade, but if their demands are met, the benefits will be, quote, enormous in terms of the growth and development of the economy in the country and in the Western Balkans region.
Well, finally, Andy, let's just talk about those demands. What are the main things that the drivers are calling for from the EU? And is there any sense that the EU is going to give in to the drivers?
Well, when it comes to those requests, the core is they want to be exempt from this 90-180 rule or have their limit expanded so they can stay instead of 3 months within half a year, 4 months, 5 months, however much. As the blockade was starting at a midday press briefing in Brussels, European Commission spokesperson said that European institutions are considering and working on finding options that would allow certain professionals, including truck drivers, to stay in the Schengen area longer than the current rules allow. They said that this is, quote, an issue that we are paying full attention to and that is being worked on and considered in the context of the preparations for the upcoming visa strategy. However, they did go on to say that this new entry-exit system does not introduce any new rules beyond the already existing Schengen rules. There have already been some proposals from the Western Balkans countries towards Brussels on how to deal with this issue. Bosnia's Ministry of Transport proposed that professional drivers employed by licensed companies in that part of Europe be allowed to move freely within the EU, but exclusively for the purpose of international road transport. Serbia's government urged for a special status for regional drivers, with their prime minister warning that the problem threatens to, quote, fully paralyze the transport companies and damage the economy of the entire region. Meanwhile, the protesting transporters made it clear that they would halt the blockade if a solution is found.
Very difficult situation indeed. Andy, as always, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Washington's latest push on regional peace as Vice President J.D. Vance prepares visits to Azerbaijan and Armenia. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. Now, US President Donald Trump says Vice President J.D. Vance will visit Azerbaijan and Armenia in February as part of Washington's push to support regional peace. Well, he announced the visit on his Truth Social account. Trump praised leaders in both countries for maintaining a peace agreement signed last August. US leader said the trip will focus on expanding strategic ties, including nuclear cooperation with Armenia and defense and technology deals with Azerbaijan. Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is Shabdam Sararova, the chair of the Public Union for Progress of Karabakh. Shabdam, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's great to have you here in the studio with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
How important is this expected visit then? I mean, it sounds like a pretty big deal. US President, Vice President rather, is this going to be central to maintaining momentum between Azerbaijan and Armenia at this stage, do you think?
I think first of all, let's clarify what is momentum at this phase. So for my opinion, it is not just continuation of talks, but it is focusing on implementation and real steps. And it is about preventing, let's say, backstage or preventing the bottlenecks in the process. And that's why, from this perspective, the high-level US engagement can be very supportive as political support in a global level. And as I mentioned, the process is entering to decisive implementation phase, and that's why I think, yes, it can be very crucial.
Yeah, I mean, of course, some of these things are obvious, but of course, the biggest military in the world, by far the biggest economy in the world.
Sure.
Are there things that the US can do for peace and prosperity that, frankly, regional leaders on their own just can't?
Yes, United States, as you mentioned, is one of the biggest powers in this world. I mean, from the economic perspective, from technical perspective, from the technological development perspective, and etc. So that's why United States can play multidisciplinary role in these processes, not only by political support, but in the future for technical support, because as you know, Karabakh, the government is building Karabakh from scratch, and it can be a very good place for communities living here for continuation and after very heavy conflict, bloody conflict. And it is not very easy for any government, I think, especially for Azerbaijan government. That's why, yes, the multidisciplinary involvement of United States can be crucial.
And there have been many strong indicators so far of the success of the process. I've been lucky enough to visit Karabakh a number of times, and whether it's the train station at Agdam, the universities, the thriving number of students that you see in Hankandi, so many parts of the region have got very clear indicators that this process is working. As things move forward, what signals should we be looking out for that momentum is continuing?
I think it is about connectivity projects between Azerbaijan and Armenia, because the peace has to be sustainable, has to be durable, because yes, Azerbaijan is investing huge amount of investment to the region, as you mentioned, to educational projects, to construction projects, transportation projects, and etc. But for sustainability of the process, and it is an expectation from United States and other global actors as well, is building very good, trustable trade connectivities, economic connectivity between two countries, which will make the process much more smooth, and it will create shared interests for Armenia as well as for Azerbaijan, and it can attract foreign investors to the process, which will be very beneficial for the both sides and will decline the burden on governments. So the burden will not be only on Armenian and on Azerbaijan governments, but the burden can be shared by global investors as well. So it can be like win-win project, let's say.
And do you think the economic progress, connectivity, technology development, do you think that will prevent any diplomatic backsliding?
No, actually no, because it can only support the diplomatic activities, because diplomacy can be effective when it is creating concrete implementation mechanisms, working mechanisms, documents, institutions, or legally binding agreements. And as I mentioned, the economic interests is shared interest, and the economic interdependence will prevent the sides for future confrontations, because the confrontation can be very costly, can be very irrational if there is some economic interests, and especially if there is foreign investment in the region. That's why I think the economic cooperation and economic projects it is not just economic issue for South Caucasus for now. It is strategic stabilizer for the region.
And to support that process, beyond governments, beyond that economic growth that we've spoken about, how about organizations like yours, influential civil society voices, groups that can help harness the voice of the people? How important is that now at this point?
For sure, the civil society cannot replace state-to-state diplomacy, but civil society can support it, especially in normalizing process, in normalizing period. I'm from Karabakh as well, and I know how it feels to be in the middle of war, and I know how it is feeling by Armenian community as well. So I can feel the empathy as well as, but despite I am victim of this conflict, and there are millions of people like me. But the civil society can be supportive in decreasing the social mistrust. It can be supportive in people-to-people contacts, or it can be supportive in creating pragmatic, future-focused narratives for the societies. Yes, the diplomacy, the political willingness is very important, but it is not enough for durable peace. For durable peace, we need social acceptance as well, and where is civil society matters a lot.
Well, Shabnam, we wish you well with the important work that you do, and we thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Israel's foreign minister's visit to Baku and what that signals for growing cooperation with Azerbaijan. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro,
Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan,
Tehran,
Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has paid an official visit to Azerbaijan, holding talks with President Ilham Aliyev. Discussions centered on deepening cooperation across trade, energy and technology, underlining the strength of ties between Baku and Tel Aviv and their shared interest in expanding practical partnerships.
President of Azerbaijan Ilham Aliyev met Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar in Baku on Monday. The sides discussed the development of Azerbaijan-Israel relations. They recalled recent talks between the presidents of Azerbaijan and Israel in Davos. The meeting focused on cooperation in trade, energy, tourism, agriculture, water management, high technologies and artificial intelligence. Both sides said regular mutual visits help strengthen relations. The role of the Azerbaijan-Israel Intergovernmental Commission was also noted. It was mentioned that its latest meeting had taken place recently. Gideon Saar said he was visiting Azerbaijan with representatives of major business circles. The minister said the Azerbaijan-Israel Business Forum would help expand economic and trade ties. Saar also thanked President Aliyev for state support for the Jewish community in Azerbaijan. During his visit, the minister met leaders of the Jewish community in Baku. In a post on his Telegram channel, he said about 30,000 Jews live in Azerbaijan alongside the Muslim population, in an atmosphere of religious tolerance and freedom of worship. Saar said Azerbaijan is an example of a Muslim-majority country that ensures the safety and well-being of its Jewish community. He added that Jews living in Azerbaijan and those who have moved to Israel form a strong base for relations between the two countries. Gideon Saar said these ties will continue to grow.
Well, joining me now to discuss this in more detail is A-News's Orkan Amashov. Orkan, great to see you as always. Let's look at this then. Azerbaijan, as people will know, a Muslim majority country, for many years though has had deep and long-standing ties with Israel. How significant is it, though, that Israel diplomacy right now is being placed on this level with Baku?
I believe, Guy, Israeli diplomacy has always placed a vital importance on having good, working, functional relations with Azerbaijan. As you rightly mentioned at the beginning, Azerbaijan is a Turkic nation, it's a Muslim majority country, of course, and Israel is a Jewish state. And I think there is one particular emotional, psychological dimension to bilateral ties between these two nations. There has never been any recorded, verifiable, legitimately approved or rather recorded and verified instance of anti-Semitism in this country. Azerbaijan and Israel have always enjoyed a degree of affinity, which is quite unheard of in the bilateral ties between the Jewish state and Muslim majority country. I think this is one element which is very strong and which will always be there. Number two element, when Azerbaijan regained its independence in the early 90s, Israel was incredibly quick to instruct its diplomats to develop bilateral ties and establish its diplomatic presence here. I think, if memory serves me correctly, it was in 1993, if not in 1995, that the Israeli embassy was established here. Azerbaijani embassy in Israel was established only in 2023 due to obvious reasons of regional sensitivities involving a number of actors here, of course. I think there is a strong security defense dimension to these relations. If before the relations were described largely by those people who are sort of to a certain extent privy to the bilateral ties, were described as drones for oil or oil resources, oil supplies for drones, the relations are, they go beyond transactional aspect. Naturally, it's a very rational relationship. Azerbaijan supplies, I think, at this juncture, around 40 Azerbaijani share in Israel's oil imports, crude oil imports, is around 46%. This figure quite often goes beyond 46 and goes up to 67% as well. So this is a sort of energy aspect of it. Azerbaijan currently, at this very juncture, owns, I think, 10% stake in the Tamar gas field, which means that Azerbaijan is no longer a mere supplier of energy to Israel, but also player in Israel's domestic energy infrastructure, which elevates Azerbaijan's role for Israel to an extent which wasn't the case before. This is one thing. Another element is, of course, defense supplies to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has always had this diversified sort of defense equipment supply coming from different countries, including Turkey, some of which coming from Russia before 2020 and still coming from Russia. But the Turkey and Israel are, I would say, two key actors. And also, naturally, you have to consider wider geopolitical scope. Neighbors that we have here in this region, these two countries have got very strong relations. And I think that this trip, this visit of the Israeli foreign minister may be seen, and probably is, an attempt to elevate relations from this limited security transactional aspect to an institutional scope.
Just going back to what you said about anti-Semitism, Orkan, I think some of our viewers outside of the region will be fascinated by this. I mean, I've lived in Baku now for just 18 months, but as you go about the coffee shops, the restaurants, the shopping malls, I mean, people like to debate and discuss and even argue with each other about many things, as you'd find in any city. And yet, for a Muslim majority country, there is no anti-Semitism. Many countries, I think, would say, how on earth have you managed to achieve that?
I mean, of course, naturally, many critics of Israel, State of Israel, would say that, I mean, when State of Israel talks about anti-Semitism, in reality, they're talking about some of the actions taken by State of Israel in relation to Gaza, in relation to Palestinian people, but they...
legitimate.
Naturally. But reality is that Azerbaijan as a country, I would say, as a population, as a nation state, as a sovereign entity, has never had problem with the State of Israel, with a Jewish state. Azerbaijan has always been acutely conscious of the sensitivity surrounding the circumstances enveloping the creation of Jewish state, its natural security concerns, and its right to defend itself. At the same time, Azerbaijan has been very supportive of the two-state solution and has been very, very sensitive about the plight of Palestinians and so forth. But there has never been a tiny bit of what one may call rejection, fundamental rejection of the State of Israel, Jewish state. And many Muslim majority countries do have some doubts to what extent the State of Israel should be protected, to what extent it's got legitimate roots and so forth. In this country, there has never been such an issue. And number two, I think, of course, 30,000 Jewish population of Azerbaijan played an important role in fostering these relations. And those people who left Azerbaijan, Soviet Azerbaijan, after the collapse of Soviet Union, moved to Israel, always carried this sense of good memories about Azerbaijan. And naturally, we've got affinity, which is a very unique affinity, and it is spreadable to other parts of the wider Middle Eastern architecture, I would say. But beyond that, there is a strong rational element to these relations. One aspect in relation to which Israel played an important role is after 2020, after the War of Karabakh, in terms of investment into Karabakh, in terms of installation of green energy mechanisms, smart city mechanisms in Karabakh, and also water management solutions, innovative solutions. Israeli-Azerbaijani relations have been absolutely important, and also Israeli companies played an important role in demining efforts in the Karabakh economic region of Azerbaijan. So what is very fascinating about these relations, there is a genuine affinity which should not be underestimated, and it goes beyond interstate relations. You've got transactional element to these relations where Azerbaijan naturally benefits from Israeli technology, defense technology and so forth, and Israel naturally benefits in the energy sector from Azerbaijan. There's also wider geopolitical configuration when you have Turkey and Iran, which are to be taken into account. I mean, the more problematic Turkish-Israeli relations happen to be, the more important Azerbaijan is emerging as a pivotal country from the perspective of Israeli foreign policy designs. Azerbaijan would never allow, this has been the cornerstone of Azerbaijan's foreign policy, its sovereign territory to be used against any country, including Iran. Therefore, it is vital from the Azerbaijani perspective to ensure that when there is a tension growing up in Iran, in view of the current developments, any security dimension to Israel-Azerbaijan relations are not used against anybody. And from the Israeli perspective, I think we have to acknowledge the fact that Israeli foreign policy has been very insistent on this Caspian vector, which means that if they want to get access to Central Asia, this is going to happen through Azerbaijan. I mean, it's a no-brainer, I suppose. I mean, if you want to get access to Central Asia, you want to avoid Russia and Iran, you need to have good relations with this country, because Azerbaijan geographically of such a size and location that through which you would get access through Caspian to Central Asia. So I would say three elements, if I may repeat myself with your permission. Affinity, which is genuine. Transactional element, bilateral relations, mutual interest and so forth. And number three, attempt to move from transactional dimension to wider institutional dimension.
And this cooperation, as you've already laid out, has got many, many different parts to it. Political, trade, energy, technology, even artificial intelligence. Which one of those areas do you see moving the fastest?
Well, I think all of them are moving fast, but I think artificial intelligence, Azerbaijan's desire and ambition, and clearly stated desire and ambition by President Ilham Aliyev himself to create data centers in this region and green energy ambitions are being also partly helped by the bilateral ties with Israel. Because when it comes to the import of Western technologies to Azerbaijan, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence or water solution, innovative, water-sensitive climate solutions in this region, Israel has always been Azerbaijan's key partner. And this is not going to change at any point. And beyond that, of course, Azerbaijan plays an important role in Israel's energy infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, 10% of stake is being owned and by Azerbaijan's Sokar energy company. And these are the key elements of these relations. But also, naturally, beyond what we have discussed already, and if we look at the wider picture and we see what else is moving very fast, I would say cybersecurity. And this is cybersecurity is essential for Azerbaijan in this evolving and changing world, when security problems and challenges are not just coming from land borders, but also in terms of wider web of artificial intelligence induced security systems. You need to have a solid protection. And I think Israeli technology played an important role in Azerbaijan in ensuring that Azerbaijan does have that protection. It's a multifaceted relations. As long as Israel is concerned, two sovereign entities, of course. I mean, Israeli-Azerbaijan relations are important, but naturally we cannot compare them to Azerbaijani-Turkish alliance, which is a completely different level. But Azerbaijan still played an important role in ensuring that Turkish-Israeli tensions in Syria do not go beyond the controllable level, I would say. And there have been a couple of talks here in Azerbaijan between Syrian officials and Israeli officials, and also between Turkish and Israeli officials. Azerbaijan wants Turkey and Israel cooperate in the Middle East, and bearing in mind that in many respects they are at loggerheads, this task is incredibly challenging. And if I may add, Guy, at the very end, I think Abraham Accords are going to play an important role in the further evolution of these relations. Everybody, and I was in Davos last week, everybody is talking about the erosion of this current world order, this UN system collapsing before our very eyes, and something new is emerging. And I think that something new will be very big and very massive and very all-encompassing. And one part of that new is definitely Peace of Board initiative, and that board which was established in Davos, Switzerland last week. Azerbaijan is a founding member, and President Donald Trump, alongside this particular board, has been pursuing the active implementation of Abraham Accords, which involve Israel having normal functional relations with Muslim majority countries. Azerbaijan does not need to be part of that system, because Azerbaijan has already cultivated very good functional bilateral relations with Israel. But when it comes to structural, institutional, economic interaction, I think that particular system could play an important role, and Azerbaijan seems to be very keen on that as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and interesting that you picked up that conversational element from Davos when you were there. The minister didn't come alone, of course. He had a big delegation, and a big part of that delegation was from the business community. What are you anticipating in terms of business collaboration? Is this going to be potentially about M&A activity? Is it going to be one country's business investing in another country's startup? How will that sort of develop itself, do you think?
Well, it's going to be probably, there's a need to truly increase and expand the trade turnover between the two nations. If you discount the oil proportion, we know that about Azerbaijan's share in Israel's crude oil imports is around 46%. The actual trade turnover, if you look at the figures which are available and official, the overall trade turnover is around $400 million US million dollars. So 300 million US dollars is a figure which is not probably commensurate with the actual potentiality of these bilateral relations. Yes. So you need to invest in AI, in green technology, in cybersecurity, and make sure that this is institutional. There's another aspect to these relations. We know that about, I think, 17% of Israel's crude oil imports come from Kazakhstan. This effectively means there is a possibility for Israeli investment in transport infrastructure, because for Israel to get Kazakh oil, Azerbaijani infrastructure put in place here should be of sufficient scale and proportion. This could induce investments in the transport, I think, sector. And there are some other elements as well, of course.
Do you think this sort of fits as one part of the economic relationship with the US as well? Because obviously Israel and the US have got some very strong commercial, business, economic relationships. We know, you've spoken very eloquently about Azerbaijan as the conduit, the gateway to Central Asia, something that both Israel and the US are looking at.
Yes, indeed. I think, I suppose it would be fair to say, on the basis of what we have heard, US current administration in Israel played an important role in making sure Azerbaijani-US relationship goes beyond its current level to a completely new level. I think Israeli diplomacy played an important role in making sure that what we describe as Azerbaijan's potentiality as a key conduit country is being noticed by the United States. I think Israeli role in current Washington-Baku ties are incredibly important. There are many ways in which these relations could improve. US is naturally, as part of the wider Abraham Accords, is interested in making sure both Armenia and Azerbaijan becomes part of this scheme. And Armenia, despite being a Christian country, is being seen as part of the wider Muslim majority country. This brings us to what US wants to achieve in this region, and to what extent Israel as a country could play an important role in the implementation of some of the US designs. As I earlier mentioned, the trade turnover between Azerbaijan and Israel is around $400 million US. It's not a big figure, bearing in mind the potentiality of these countries. One thing will be, bearing in mind the current developments taking place in northern Iraq, which is controlled by Kurdish regional government, and Syria, which is governed by Ahmed al-Shara, which also in the fullness of time should join Abraham Accords. You've got this, what Israeli analysts probably would call some strategic encirclement of Iran. So you got Syria, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and this sort of a belt which is neighboring Iran, which is secure, which provides a lifeline for Israeli exports to Central Asia. And naturally, within this scope, naturally, the United States has got massive interest. Israeli, I mean, if you look at the way American policymakers and diplomats see this region, wider Middle East, one thing is very clear: they want to make sure Israel and Turkey have good relations. They do not want confliction between them, but deconfliction. And therefore, U.S. administration has been very appreciative of Azerbaijani efforts in the context of Israeli-Turkish deconfliction. They want Syria to be more or less stable, and they acknowledge Turkish presence there. At the same time, of course, naturally, Iran is a massive subject, and whatever will happen there will have massive implications for the wider regional architecture. It's vital to ensure that, from Azerbaijan's perspective, without in any way falling into the trap of being used territorially against Iran, it's vital that at a time when uncertainty is looming,
because it's very interesting, because the situation in Iran, I suppose, does present that potential diplomatic trap.
Well, it doesn't, because we don't know what will happen. Iran is a very intricate country. We don't know what is exactly happening there. We don't know how many people were killed as a result of there's a crackdown on the uprising. We know that the situation there is evolving, but one thing very certain: any spillover effect must be maintained. And nobody in the region, and when I say in the region, I mean amongst the neighbors, immediate neighbors of Israel, Iran, wants the complete collapse of Iranian state. Because you may not like the Islamic Republic of Iran for many reasons, and I'm saying this is from the wider perspective, but you have to prepare yourself for the immediate fallout of the collapse of the state system there. Neither Azerbaijan, nor Armenia, nor Pakistan, nor probably Afghanistan, I imagine, do not want collapse of the current system there, because the implications that are going to follow will be too hideous to contemplate. Therein you have this Israeli intention to achieve what could be described as in academic terms as a regime change there, which is being counteracted by Israel's key allies or key partners in the region. Therefore, for Azerbaijani foreign policy at this juncture, you've got a massive crisis happening down in the south, in Iran. You've got your strategic partner, Azerbaijan and Israel are strategic partners. So you want to make sure that within this crisis, your relations with Israel will allow you to protect yourself, but not to be drawn into the actual conflict itself. This is a very challenging and very, I would say, incredibly intellectual and diplomatically challenging task for the Azerbaijani diplomacy. And then the next stop for the Israeli Prime Minister will be Kazakhstan. There's a business entrepreneurial element to that trip as well, but this is also part of wider encirclement from Israeli perspective. So what is very fascinating about this intricate relationship, Azerbaijan and Israel are strategic partners, but their interests, when it comes directly to what's happening in Iran, are not necessarily aligned. They're aligned to the extent of Azerbaijan protecting themselves, but not in terms of what is going to happen in Iran in the fullness of time as a result of what's happening now.
Hugely complex. Orkan, we're very grateful that you've made it back from Davos to join us and expound those details for us. Thank you very much. After the break, we'll check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome to A-News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we're reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A-News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Turkey has dispatched a fresh shipment of humanitarian aid to northern Syria as fighting continues despite a declared ceasefire. 11 trucks carrying food and winter supplies have reached the city of Ain al-Arab, known as Kobani. Now, the delivery comes amid renewed tensions between Syrian government forces and the Kurdish-led SDF.
Turkey on Sunday dispatched 11 trucks of humanitarian aid to the Syrian city of Ain al-Arab, also known as Kobani, to help civilians affected by ongoing fighting in northern Syria. The relief shipment was carried out by Turkey's Emergency Management Authority and the Turkish Red Crescent in coordination with Damascus and an aid coordination center in the Syrian city of Aleppo. According to Turkish state media, the overland aid convoy included 5 trucks carrying 50 tons of flour, 5 trucks with other food supplies, and 1 truck loaded with winter blankets. The Turkish aid delivery comes amid continued fighting in northern Syria between government security personnel and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, despite a ceasefire deal that was announced last week. On Sunday, Damascus alleged that the SDF, which Ankara views as a terrorist group, had carried out 25 drone attacks on positions in the Aleppo countryside in violation of the truce. Announced in mid-January, the landmark ceasefire deal calls for the SDF to lay down its arms and integrate its fighters into Syria's state military. It also calls for SDF-held areas, including border crossings and oil fields, to be placed under the control of Syria's central government. This is Adam Mara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Georgia's disputed 2024 parliamentary elections have now reached Europe's top human rights court. Judges in Strasbourg have begun examining complaints over the integrity of the vote, a legal process that could shape Georgia's electoral framework in the long term without triggering immediate political change.
The European Court of Human Rights has started reviewing complaints concerning Georgia's 2024 parliamentary elections. The cases were filed by the Georgian Young Lawyers Association, JYLA, and several individual applicants. At the core of the complaint are allegations that the election administration failed to protect the secrecy of the vote, particularly at polling stations using electronic voting technologies. JYLA also challenges limits on election complaints in Georgian law and argues that too few polling stations abroad restricted citizens' right to vote. The court is examining the case under the European Convention's provisions on free elections and the right to an effective legal remedy. Georgia has until May 15th to submit its position. The government, however, says that the significance of the court's actions is being overstated. Officials argue that a large part of the complaints has already been declared inadmissible and that no substantive review has begun. According to the parliamentary majority, the court is still deciding whether the remaining claims meet basic admissibility requirements, including proof of individual rights violations. JYLA disputes this interpretation. The organization says that the court has consolidated 3 complaints and may treat the case as one of significant impact, allowing it to examine whether problems with electronic voting affected the secrecy of ballots on a broader scale. The legal debate takes place against a highly polarized political background. The 2024 parliamentary elections were among the most tense in Georgia's recent history, followed by widespread disputes and challenges to the government's legitimacy. Since then, Georgia's political direction and its foreign policy course have increasingly come under question. Importantly, the Strasbourg court is not deciding who governs Georgia. Its role is legal, not political. Any eventual ruling, likely years away, would focus on election procedures and could influence how future elections are conducted, including electronic voting, overseas polling, and access to courts. For now, the case remains at an early stage. The court has asked questions, not reached conclusions. What happens next depends on whether the complaints pass the admissibility phase and move to a full legal judgment. Nini Nikolai, Israeli, Tbilisi, A News.
Saudi Arabia is weighing new investments in Uzbekistan, with housing and transport infrastructure emerging as key priorities in expanding bilateral cooperation. Our correspondent has more now from Tashkent.
Saudi Arabia is reviewing the possibility of financing two socially significant projects in Uzbekistan, totaling $138 million, covering affordable housing in Kyrgyz, Pakistan, and the reconstruction of damaged bridges on national roads. The projects were discussed by Uzbekistan's investment minister Laziz Kudratov and the head of the Saudi Fund for Development, Sultan Al-Marshad. The Saudi Fund for Development is already one of Uzbekistan's key financial partners. Its current portfolio includes 11 projects worth $287.4 million, covering healthcare, education, water supply, irrigation, housing and transport infrastructure. The new initiatives are now at the feasibility stage and are considered a priority due to their direct impact on living standards and regional connectivity. The housing project is expected to improve access to affordable accommodation in Kyrgyz, Pakistan, while the bridge repairs aim to strengthen transport safety and logistics efficiency. Uzbek and Saudi officials agreed to deepen cooperation further and expand joint initiatives in line with Uzbekistan's national development priorities, with a focus on long-term socially oriented investment. It is Sivili Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Kazakhstan and Mongolia are moving to deepen economic ties, with plans to significantly expand bilateral trade in the years ahead. Talks are focused on cutting barriers and broadening cooperation across key sectors. Our correspondent reports now from Almaty.
Kazakhstan and Mongolia plan to increase their bilateral trade turnover to $500 million in the medium term. The growth is expected to come from expanded agricultural exports and stronger industrial cooperation between the two countries. The plans we discussed during intergovernmental talks focused on trade and economic cooperation, as well as on the gradual removal of trade and administrative barriers. The target has been set at the level of the two heads of state and is viewed as a key benchmark for bilateral relations. Officials say the increase will be driven by a wider range of mutual supplies and the development of joint cooperation projects. Particular attention is being paid to agriculture, where both sides see strong potential. Discussions included expanding exports of Kazakh agricultural products and supplying veterinary vaccines with the possibility of localizing production in Mongolia. Trade figures already point to steady growth. From January to November 2025, trade turnover between the two countries reached $121.5 million, up 5.5% compared to the same period last year. Exports accounted for $113 million, while imports stood at $8.6 million. The export structure is dominated by tobacco products, rapeseed, bakery and confectionery products, oilseeds, as well as engines and engineering products. To support continued growth, trade mission is planned to Mongolia to establish direct business contacts and showcase industrial zones and export opportunities. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Severe winter weather has killed at least 61 people and injured more than 100 across Afghanistan over the past 4 days. Heavy snow and rain have destroyed hundreds of homes and cut off remote communities. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the latest from Kabul.
Afghanistan is grappling with the deadly impact of extreme winter weather, as heavy snowfall and rainfall across the country have claimed at least 61 lives and left over 110 others injured in the past 4 days. The figures were confirmed on Sunday by the National Disaster Management Authority. Its spokesperson Yusuf Hamad said that at least 458 homes have been completely or partially destroyed, while hundreds of animals have been perished in at least 15 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. He warned that the numbers could still rise as authorities continue to gather information from affected areas and struggle to reach villages cut off from snow-blocked roads and floodings. The impact of such disaster has been amplified by decades of conflict, weak infrastructure, widespread poverty, and deforestation, alongside with the growing effects of climate change. Many homes, particularly in rural areas, are built from mud, offering little protection against heavy snowfall or sudden downpours. Earlier this month, the United Nations warned that Afghanistan would remain one of the world's largest humanitarian crises in 2026. For now, authorities say the focus remains on reopening roads, delivering emergency assistance, and preventing further loss of life as winter conditions continue to pose a serious threat. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
China has handed over 17 Filipino sailors rescued after a shipwreck in the northeastern South China Sea. Now, the transfer followed a maritime incident in the area. Our correspondent has more from Beijing.
This is a dramatic moment. The China Coast Guard rescued Filipino sailors from a cargo ship that capsized, leaving 2 dead in the South China Sea. Footage shows personnel pulling the distressed crew on board after the Singapore-flagged MV Devon Bay overturned in disputed waters on Thursday evening. According to official information, all 17 crew members were rescued by Chinese Maritime Search and Rescue Forces, but 2 were later confirmed dead despite medical treatment. The remaining survivors received emergency care and humanitarian assistance before being transferred to Philippine authorities through bilateral coordination. 4 other crew members remain missing, and search and rescue operations are continuing. Chinese authorities said efforts are ongoing to locate the missing sailors and reiterated their commitment to maritime safety and humanitarian cooperation in relevant waters. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Okay, let's take a look now at other top stories from around the world. Tensions are escalating in the US city of Minneapolis after a US citizen was shot dead by a federal immigration agent, the second fatal incident of its kind this month. The killing has triggered widespread protests, strong criticism, and legal action by state authorities. US President Donald Trump declined to say whether the federal officer acted appropriately and said the administration was reviewing the incident. Here's more on that story.
Immigration enforcement operations in Minneapolis are under renewed scrutiny after a US citizen was shot and killed by federal agents, the second fatal shooting linked to immigration operations in the city this month. 37-year-old Alex Pretty, an intensive care nurse, was killed on Saturday during a confrontation with immigration officers. The shooting sparked protests, prompted the deployment of the National Guard, and deepened tensions between state and federal authorities. Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz accused the federal government of escalating violence and demanded the withdrawal of immigration agents.
So now we've got 2 Minnesotans dead. We didn't had time to start telling Renee's story of a poet and a mother and a bright spirit, and now we're telling Alex's story. So my question is, what's the plan, Donald Trump? What is the plan? What do we need to do to get these federal agents out of our state? You thought fear, violence, and chaos is what you wanted from us, and you clearly underestimated the people of this state and nation.
Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said legal action was being taken to halt the operation.
Minneapolis is a precursor to a whole lot of other places that they have their eye on right here, right now, including Maine and several other states. If we don't stop this behavior here, it will only expand, and it won't be good for anyone in our country.
US President Donald Trump defended his administration's immigration crackdown, saying the operation would continue despite criticism. In a social media post, Trump blamed Democratic-led states and cities for unrest and said the deaths of 2 US citizens were the result of what he called Democrat-ensued chaos. Federal authorities said the agent acted in self-defense, claiming Pritty brandished a firearm, an account disputed by bystander video footage reviewed by Reuters, which appears to show him holding a phone. Border Patrol officials said enforcement operations would continue.
Our Title VIII immigration mission continues, unabated, here in Minneapolis, despite yesterday's tragedy that was preventable by folks making better choices, politicians, journalists, and would-be anarchists and rioters.
Hundreds of protesters later gathered in Minneapolis despite sub-zero temperatures, with demonstrations also reported in other U.S. cities. Pritty's death follows the fatal shooting of another Minnesota resident, Renee Good, earlier this month during federal immigration operations.
Well, let's end tonight's programme with some nice news. Now, what happens when a mistake works better than the plan? Well, in China, a factory error has done just that, turning a production slip-up into unexpected success. A downbeat toy horse, never meant to look this way, has gone viral ahead of the Lunar New Year and is now selling fast. Proof that even flaws can find their moment.
At Yiwu International Trade City, China's vast wholesale hub, one small shop is drawing outsized attention ahead of the Lunar New Year. Shoppers are stopping for a red plush horse that looks anything but festive. With a drooping mouth, downcast eyes, and a gold bell around its neck, the toy appears quietly miserable. It has gone viral on Chinese social media as the country prepares for the Year of the Horse, earning the nickname the Crying Horse. The look was never planned. The toy was designed to smile, but a factory worker stitched the mouth on upside down. When the mistake was spotted, the shop offered a refund. Instead, photos of the sad horse began circulating online, and demand quickly followed.
Yes. A lot of customers like it, and they said it makes sense, that it suits the spirit of today's corporate slaves. Many customers liked it, and then it started selling very well, so we just kept producing them. Right now it's pretty good. Sales are quite good.
Many young buyers say the toy reflects long working hours and daily pressure, especially among office workers. It also fits a wider trend for so-called ugly cute toys that have become popular in recent years.
From my perspective, to be honest, I think this crying horse is ugly. I don't like it at all. Maybe it's that people my age don't like it and young people do. Besides, during the new year, you're supposed to go for something auspicious. A big, drooping mouth like this? I feel really surprised.
By early afternoon, stacks of the crying horses are already sold out, with staff rushing to restock shelves.
Well, that brings us to the end of Primetime. Please do join us tomorrow night for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.